Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the May 2023 meeting of the Planning Commission. I'm Bill Dowdy, and we will begin with Ms. Reynolds. If you'll call roll, please.
Mr. Dowdy.
Here.
Mr. Kelly. Dr. Kern. Mr. Farrell. Hennessy.
Here.
Mr. Iwan.
Here.
Ms. Kay.
Here.
Good. We will start with the approval of minutes, and we have several months of February, March, and April to review. So I'd like to begin by having a motion to approve the February minutes.
So moved.
In a second.
Second.
Okay, any questions regarding the February minutes? Okay, if not, I'd like to have all those in favor of approving these minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And let's move on to the March minutes. Motion to approve the March minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any questions regarding the March minutes? Looks like everyone's done their homework and read all these minutes. That's a good thing. All those in favor? Okay, let's move on to April. All those?
You have to.
Oh, yes, let's have all those in favor of approving the minutes of March. Say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? And now we'll go to April, and a motion to approve April minutes,
So moved.
and a second.
Second.
Thank you. And any comments, questions regarding the April minutes? Okay, all those in favor of approving the April minutes, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Okay. Next agenda, moving right along, is public comments. I don't think we have anyone from the public today. So we'll go with our next agenda item, which is old business, and it's the Kiowa Next update. John, if you'll introduce this section, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is regarding our comprehensive plan, Kiowa Next. Today, you have the pleasure of welcoming Blake back with us, who represents our consultant team with LS3P. Today, he will be going through the summary of findings from our first two sort of leg of community or public outreach, rather, which is the stakeholder engagement sessions. If you recall, we've had a number of these in February, March. And those particular meetings we held with a number of different stakeholders to get their feedback. In the beginning of this public outreach process, we began our community survey. And so Blake will walk through the findings of those two stakeholder engagement components. And this is, as I stated at our last meeting, we really wanted to have a wide range look of capturing the input into understanding what our vision is for Kiowa. And so this is part of that intake process of us gathering information from the community, stakeholders at large. And so I'll turn it over to Blake. That's really, he'll be doing most of the driving and engaging with you all, ask questions, make comments, but he'll be walking us through that process today. There's a clicker here for you.
Oh, great. Assume it's just the zero. Well, good to see you all. We have a lot to cover. This is a process that I hope will be informal. This setup sometimes feels formal, but we'll run through all this. Just want to start out looking a little bit at the project structure. We showed this slide last time I was standing at this lectern of sort of the state requirements, the processes that we are required to do in terms of existing conditions and inventorying those, statement of needs and goals, and talking about implementation strategies. The state requirement also requires these 10 facets of comp plans be looked at. We'll go into these later into the slide, so just wanted to mention those here. And lastly, we talked about the ability to have some flexibility with some of these other optional opportunities in terms of making this specific plan a little bit more approachable, a little bit more compelling, a little bit more of a public-facing document that could be accepted by the community, as opposed to some other ones that kind of become a little bit stale, a little bit utilitarian alone. So. We did talk about a plan everyone can get behind, which I think gets to that last point that I was just making, which one of you said when we were sitting over there at a workshop a few months ago. Just to kind of level set where we are, we have set up this plan in 3 parts. The first phase being the assess period, the second being empower, and the third being implement. I would say we're somewhere in between this assessing and empowering. John and I have been discussing a lot of the next steps of how we get in conversations with the right people to empower them to make the right decisions, how the Planning Commission and the plans that moving forward can be actionable, implementable, ready to go. Just as a reminder to that end, this team is a combination of both my firm, LS3P, and our partner firm, who is Kimley Horn, both who've done a great deal of work here on the islands, as we discussed, working in partnership. I know that you guys have seen, all 4 of you here present, I know attended a number of these sessions, so you've seen my face a good bit, but I will let you know. That's partly because I'm the project manager, but also because the person I was doing some of this engagement lead. You can see the rest of the team here. Jessica attended some of our sessions in terms of thinking about economic development, but we have others involved in terms of who we think about land use, architecture, and these other components that you're mentioning here at the bottom. As we move, kind of today we're on the end of input, and then we'll kind of move from what we're acknowledging as challenges to solutions next, and we'll bring in a lot of this richer, broader expertise. So just teeing that up as to where we're headed. Important thing to note, there's 4 really kind of buckets of input that we think feed into the comprehensive plan in order to get it done. The first bucket is the community engagement, which you've seen the Kiawah Next campaign. I loved coming in the front door and seeing the QR code right there on that little buffet or counter area. Community engagement, the stakeholder engagement, the other piece, this 26 conversations that we had with various stakeholders, which you sat in on a number of those. So really today we're covering those first 2 buckets, community engagement, stakeholder engagement. The third input here that we think about is best practices. So I think back just to the slide that we were just looking at, all of this various expertise that you see listed here at the bottom from architecture, traffic and transit, land use, economics, master planning, all of that gets fed into that third bucket. This is where we get to bring some guidance through some of our expertise. And lastly, analysis. This is both aggregating the recent existing reports that have been created, as well as doing some new analysis to answer some questions. So these are really the 4 things that will feed into our comprehensive plan. So for today, the purpose is to walk through these first 2 buckets to get a summary to date of the community engagement as well as the stakeholder engagement. I just want to affirm that everything that we have heard, that this is it, so you understand it. I would also say it's a little bit of leveling the playing field, just so that everyone's kind of on the same page a little bit. It helps any one person or individual avoid any personal biases. Really starting to confirm priorities for the next phase of work. Are we looking at the right challenges? Are we directing our efforts at the right thing? And lastly, just making this process as transparent as possible. As I said, I hope this can be an informal discussion, but I will give you some disclaimers. There's a lot of topics to cover here. With that being said, there's nothing that we have to finish in this process today. If there's any questions, comments, concerns that y'all have after I walk away, please know you can connect with me through John. But really, truly, this is the beginning of a new phase of the project. The purpose of today is really for us to just name, identify the challenges. We don't need to get into solutions just yet. I know that can be a potential pitfall to sort of jump towards solutions, but don't really have a need to do that. And lastly, there is not a real hard need to determine the source of any of this feedback here. It's more of a question of, is this a priority, yes or no? Is this part of the thinking that should guide us in our next steps? Does that all make sense? Yes, ma'am.
I understood when we first started this that in getting stakeholder feedback, there were also going to be community sessions. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we've had those, where you, like the town council has had a couple of guys saying, hey, come to the Nest or come to town hall and discuss whatever, that I thought we were going to have some meetings open to the broad community, not just these very small stakeholder group representatives, to get further input.
We had discussed that. I think it just in our discussions with John and through other reasons, I think those had fallen as to a little bit to the wayside as we had started focusing more on the online stuff. Still very much a possibility to do that. I think we've had an overwhelming amount of support and involvement via the online stuff, but happy to discuss it. Did you want to make a comment on
I
that?
just wanted to add too, so the community sessions, overall, that was sort of naming in the entire breadth of this process from beginning to end, that the community would be engaged in it. So it wasn't necessarily identifying a specific point of community engagement, one meeting today, one meeting tomorrow, but throughout this process, we'll have the community engaged. This particular today represents technically one of those opportunities. But our primary goal has been through the survey, which we've received, which you'll see or have seen a significant amount of feedback from the community at large. We did reach out to various groups. Those who did respond, we talked to them. But I think to answer your question of at-large community groups, those findings, I think having something to necessarily respond to helps that engagement process. That's kind of what me and Blake just talked about. Having something for the community to respond to would have them better provide feedback.
Okay, Bill, maybe you want to do something like the town council has done, where a couple of us meet on different occasions in just an open, casual session to solicit more, because I know I've talked to people who said, oh, I didn't see the survey, or I didn't fill it out, or what's this about? Because most people, don't focus as much as we all
Sure.
do. That I think it might be worthwhile for those of us on the commission to reach out to different, go to the Kia Women's Group coffees, or go to certain different groups and say, hey, what do you think? I think it'd be worth our while if we want to get that broad-based community buy-in to what we're doing.
Certainly something we can talk about, and I know Michael's done a good job of reaching out to a lot of people and getting their inputs. Maybe it's something that could be tied into that, Michael, but I'll let you talk about that. But certainly something to talk about.
I mean, I like the idea because not everybody would come to the planning commission because they sometimes don't connect the dots. And then it's a very formal meeting, you guys all sitting up there.
Sure.
There's a podium, and I have to go up and speak into the microphone, and I'm on video. Uncomfortable for some. So just make it, casual, have it nicely, promoted by Aaron. And pick 2 or 3 dates and solicit input.
What I would suggest then is what we've done in our previous comprehensive plan updates, like I said, taking this information that's been done today and placing it at sort of more of a workshop format so people can engage. I mean, we can usually schedule that date for people to respond to. So I think this feedback is part of that process. And I don't think that it's closing off that process today, but I think we can schedule a date or two to have an at-large, essentially community meeting regarding the engagement component. If that's what you're referencing, we can.
Yeah,
we can
I
schedule
know
that.
on ones I've worked on before, after we've completed the surveys, then we have a community meeting and people
So
come and
that's-
talk and say, well, I didn't really mean this, or what about?
That's the part I was getting to of like, I want you guys to at least say, okay, this is the right head, this ship is heading in the right direction. Then we can essentially poster what, after your feedback as commissioners, to the broader community and let them respond to it.
Thanks, John.
Certainly, yeah. We see input is vital through the entire process of this. Happy to do any of those things. So yeah, we'll just go ahead and jump into this. A lot of information on these slides. I'll try to call that out. With community engagement, we did talk about this no stone left unturned process. I think to this end, we'd started out this. The text that you see in the background was not a Kia-specific text. It's a text that we use whenever we go out and start community engagement of trying to understand the entities that we want to engage with. The maze of Ks is really the only unique Kia-specific thing. So we accomplished all the ones that we see here in blue that we hit at all of these organizations. So really coming at things in a broad way. Stakeholder engagement, really, we're excited. We're chatting to the resort, to the utility, to the Conservancy, Kiwa Partners, the folks at Edens for Freshfields, kind of all over. And I know y'all were, a number of y'all attended several of those. So through the engagement, through the online portal, we saw some really great numbers. We saw 3,500 website views today, which comes from some 2,800 unique visitors that we were able to see there. There were 847 total respondents to the survey. Once we look at the number of questions that were answered, not all of them complete all of them. It's more than 10,000 survey questions, responses. This last number is a little bit confusing, but I did not have a better number to use here. John and I kind of batted around a few numbers here. We typically, when we look at engagement, we look at the percentage of respondents or website viewers as a percent population of the most recent survey. That helps us understand in a typical municipality, so 10% of folks got involved. Obviously, Kia was a unique entity when really there's no easy metric by which we would say, there's a permanent population or a set resident. So we just went ahead and used that number of the census number, which is about 2,200, I believe. And so normally we hit a number that's around like 5 or 10% involvement, and we say 1 in 10 folks is really great. So to hit 140% is kind of wild, kind of mind-blowing. So we would view that as very successful at having this number of folks involved. So
I have absolutely no idea what that number means.
I mean, it could be all visitors, and that's what most of them are. So it's kind of a meaningless number. It doesn't really tell us anything.
I think it's normally the way that we use it is just for magnitude of scales. If you can look at typically, like I said, if a 10% number is a good for other municipalities, it's saying, like roughly 1 in 10, or a scale of 1 in 10 folks came and spoke with us. So yeah, it is difficult here, which is why I gave the disclaimer about it. But yeah. In general, 847 respondents, if that's easier just to look at an absolute number, we still view as very, very successful.
Do you have the breakdown of that? Because this is something I know Madeline and I talked to you about in advance of this. The breakdown of that 847, we wanted to see how many of them are full-time, part-time. I didn't see that in here.
The next slide.
So,
Oh, right, but by some of the responses.
Well, I mean, if I just logically speaking, that if 50% were a property owner of some kind, you'd say full-time and part-time property owners. So that would be 70% of 2,200 would be about 1,400.
and we can send along all of this, raw data if you want. We were just trying to summarize it in a legible format here, but certainly can get that to you if that's useful. Felt really good about this. Large percentage of property owners, the first 2 columns, part-time and full-time, sort of divided, but I think as those add up, you can see mostly owners, residents here. A few number of employees. We tried through multiple different means to reach employees, but really weren't getting a huge response there. Got a lot of visitors, vacationers, and others who visit for other purposes here, other recreation purposes.
So like you could easily have checked both the second and the third column.
It was check all of those that apply, yes, which is why I think the third is likely in some ways a
Compilation of the first two.
of the first 2. We originally started out with saying without using the part-time resident, we had left an other, and after the first day, 90% of the others were people saying I'm just a part-time resident. So we added that to capture that group and try to correct for that. So we'll run through here. There's a bunch of stuff on here. I'll say just in general, before we jump into this community engagement, when you're looking at more than 800, more than 10,000 response answers, really the goal for us is summary is the purpose here. In some ways that's useful, but inherently that also means that outliers don't get looped into the summary. So again, with this, we can provide raw data if it's useful for anyone, but I think in terms of coming to a summary, it means that, in short, I think John and I both looked at this and said, nothing too surprising, but we can still talk through it in a lot of different ways. As we first started out by asking what makes Kiowa great, really just kind of trying to find some of these defining features that Kiowa should protect and celebrate. First in these and seen the most was this proximity to the landscape, the diversity of beautiful landscapes, the lush tree canopies, sense of safety, solitude, tranquility, slower pace of life. You can move through these, you get family-friendly programs, activities, outdoor rec, more landscape, neighborhood feel, small retail, small village-like retail. lack of commercialization, high-quality amenities, and golfing facilities here. What does Kiowa lack relative? Oh, yeah. This is a list of our team running through the 800 and trying to summarize the recurring motifs.
It's not? Oh, I thought it was, so there's, okay, so high-quality amenities in golf might have been the first. These are not in any particular order?
Correct. I mean, this was not so there's sort of two sort of answers that come out of this, and you'll see we're starting on the front end with qualitative. On the latter portion of these is quantitative, and the purpose of the graphs. We like these qualitative ones more because they kind of capture more nuanced answers, but it doesn't provide, we don't run through and do a tick mark on them and say this many people said nature, this many things. Really leaving the open-ended questions allows us to get a richer, more nuanced view of some of these answers.
John, you mentioned in your email that, when you sent us, that you left the outliers off. I want to make sure I understand. An outlier is somebody who wants to build a football stadium? Okay.
Yes. Someone who said, I mean, I can't think of a great example, but if someone said, we need thousands more residents, and it was the only time we heard it, they did not make it into this bullet-pointed list.
You're way off the map.
Sure. Again, happy to share any raw data. I think we were trying to do this to alleviate some of this answers.
Excuse me. So I understand why you just had the composite view here. Would there be the possibility of doing these in order, some kind of the quantities reflecting the answers that were cited most often down to least often? I just think it might give us a feel for.
We can. I mean, these are all open-ended questions, so people saying the same thing, someone says larger capacity clubhouses, and then another person says, I want these club facilities to be bigger. The only way for us to do that would be read through all of these and do tick marks on it. For our purposes, and I was explaining this on the front end of this process, that we don't like to look for the hard and objective statements. For us, we're trying to paint a richer kind of picture of all the things that are going on. I think for us too, the nature of our working all over is going in and we're looking at sort of things that are typical that we see in other places that we'd expect to see and other things that are different. And really, I think typically very early on, we have an understanding of what that is. And so this is for helping us just kind of support that, affirm that we're headed in the right direction, that we have a nuanced understanding of the place.
I think it's important for us, though, to know, for example, how many people said, or of the people who said, for example, non-resort affiliated public amenities, are those mostly residents? Are those mostly visitors? I think it would help all of us to understand, and I would like to see some of the statistical and backup data, because I think that would help us.
Well, I think it's nice to marry the qualitative with the quantitative.
Sure. Yep. Well,
Unless it's impossible to go back and do that at this point.
It's not impossible. The statement that I would make is that for us as a planning team, this process is one that we followed that is typical that we do to get a nuanced understanding of the place. I think any additional study that we would be doing or a sort of analysis in the way that you're talking about would not benefit our process. We're happy to share that. I think there's things that we could do, like run it through a program that could do a word cloud and do a search through the words or terms that appear the most and sort of help bring those to the top on these open-ended questions. But I think that would just be for y'all to look at. I don't think it would inform our process.
Michael has a question.
Yeah.
I have to violently disagree. Well, partially, let's say. So I think going through, accounting process here is both too tedious and doesn't help. But just these two slides up there without at least some kind of ranking of how often these things are named, okay, suggests a lot of things that are actually not included. So I looked at this slide just up there right now, and I said, okay, interesting. You know, the majority of people that, you know, complains about the lack says cultural and arts event. That's how I look at this. So you're actually misleading if this is not in a somehow, okay, list of priority. You're misleading the reader, and that means the community in the outcome.
I would add a point here. In my mind, I think that's the commissioner's job. So we are in this process now, I think, gathering everything that could be a concern. And I think we would bucket that data and saying these are all concerns. I think you all spending some time with that, and to your point of pushing that back out to community, then we begin to say this is really a top priority, this is not really a top priority, a concern. But I think that's the role of where you all as the commissioner saying, hey, you all have more legs and tentacles to the community to know that, okay, culture and arts events programming, is that the number one thing that we need to focus on as a town right now? It probably isn't. So that's where you as a commissioner are influencing this plan.
I think, though, one of the things you said at the beginning, which I agree, is that we should try and leave behind any personal biases any of us on the commission might have. And that's where I look to hard data to say, I might think this, but the majority of the communities think something else, and in our comprehensive plan, it should reflect what the community wants.
No, I don't disagree with that. What I'm saying is that this particular list of items is what the community says are their concerns, right? And what the next phase of this engagement is to be able to essentially categorize those things through our goals, identifying what challenges we need to focus on. And so presenting this information back to the community will help us digest that in a format. These aren't suggestions. These come directly from the, yeah. Okay.
So I see this for the first time, well, second time. So I really thought when I was reading this last night, that's a kind of, I was not assuming that you would have counted and said, you know, there were 265 for cultural and art events and 255 for larger capacity clubhouse. I was not assuming that, but I was assuming a sequence. So, and to what you said earlier, I understand this would be far too tedious to do it, but guys, just download it into Excel and make a count by buzzword, right? How often is culture? How often is arts? How often is clubhouse mentioned in the responses? And you will get some numbers. They might not be 100% because some people would use club facility instead of a clubhouse, but at least to get a little bit of a priority behind this. So to also make exactly what Joanne said, it's a little easier for them to say, interesting, I thought this would have been much higher, but it is not.
I'm just saying that could occur at the next stage. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that could occur at the next stage.
And just one more point, Blake, you talked about your process of putting this together. Now we're just asking you to help us with our piece of the process, and that would be aided by some kind of ranking.
Sure.
Even if it's imperfect.
And I'll say, just to be clear, with 800 responses, each of these slides has, I don't know, maybe 10 or so bullet points. What this was us going through each question and saying what rose to the top. The filter, so there was a filter of us reading it, and I would also say the purposes of today and our next steps is also for y'all to help us be the filter on this. And so I think part of that is built in to this process as well. So back to this one. So what is it that we were consistently hearing that people feel like Kiowa lack? Cultural and arts events and programs, larger capacity clubhouses. I would in general say that clubhouses here was lumped with, in general, amenities, club amenities. You see it a few down here. We also heard it specifically with resort-affiliated public amenities as well. A range of independent and affordable dining options, really dining options overall, was seen as a big need. Places to casually gather. We heard that a number of times of just sort of once I get off work or get off the golf course, where can I just casually go that feels a little bit more informal and pretentious. Access to medical facilities. I know some of that's in the discussion with MUSC, but it did recur a number of times. Mentions of business centers, fitness gyms, and tennis ball and pickleball courts seem to be some of the specific amenities that came up a few times. Casual nightlife, night activity, easy in and out access to the island was heard lacking. A dog park recurred a number of times, and the larger grocery store recurred many times as well, though I know that discussion is going on. What changes or additions would improve your experience here at Kiawah? Again, different formats or different answers that we heard, some types of amenities, family-focused entertainment activities, more accessibility to and from the island. So some of these, again, start to recur, bleed over, or answer in different ways and different questions. Renter and tourist rural education came up, alternative modes of transportation around and off the island, improved gate security and traffic flow, easier access to everyday commercial needs, activities for non-golfers, and casual experiential dining. On this one, asking just kind of robust ideas of what ideas represent the culture of Kiawah. This is an important one for us because I think any community that we go in, one of the questions that we ask a lot is we try to understand what is sacred about that community, what is really special, and what other areas are flexible or things that could change without affecting an understood or shared identity in the place. We heard so much of this prioritization of ecosystem preservation and then in the natural environment, experiences that respect the natural environment, protect it, shared goals of keeping Kiawah clean, peaceful, and relaxing, respectful and thoughtful development, extensive leisure trails and bike paths, opportunity for social and intellectual interaction, quiet, laid-back, unobtrusive nature of residents, high-quality golfing facilities and amenities, and designs that blend with the environment. So these were the answers heard the most here. We asked what features define the physical character, what marks the landscape here on the island. Pristine beaches, forest, and wildlife, a moderate, tasteful design, well-maintained natural beauty, quaint retail, preserved green areas, harmony between development and nature, and lack of overdevelopment. What risks should we be aware of if we are making changes or improvements to any elements of Kiawah? Climate change, reckless destruction of natural resources, reduction of green spaces, jeopardizing peace and privacy for the trade-off of growth, traffic and water management, amenities that do not support growth, over-commercialization and development, and the lack of a small town, small community feel. What, if any, concerns do you have about Kiawah's future? Inadequate off-island road infrastructure, climate change, said in many different ways over here, overcrowding, overdevelopment, overcommercialization. Those three, said in different ways, probably dominated this question the most. Increased usage of amenities, workforce housing to support the island, and traffic on roadways. So now we jump into some of these quantitative answers. As I mentioned before we started this process, some of these, you all mentioned earlier the marrying of quantitative and qualitative. Some of these are ones that after the fact, you're trying to understand how people answered. There are certainly places where it seems like there's some inconsistencies between quantitative and qualitative, and that's why we always tend to go back more to the qualitative, because when people answer loosely, we feel like they can get to things as opposed to being limited by some of the answers here. But we'll try trying our best to interpret these. When considering existing housing in residential areas, identify if each of the following is a strength or weakness for Kiowa. I'll try to do just big takeaways on all of these. Really, as you see in the first two left columns, the character of the residential areas and the quality of housing really are the ones that have some of the stronger answers. Things kind of mellow out and get more neutral as you talk about a variety of housing options, housing that appeals to younger crowds, housing that appeals to new families, the value and cost of home, with availability of affordable housing being the only one that is very, very strongly negative. What kind of impact would each of the following types of residential development have on the community? This is one where you see single-family homes really being the only answer here that leans towards positive. Every single other development or housing typology leans strongly to negative. These are, in some of these questions, it's really interesting for us because these are the types of questions where we are also bringing in our expertise from the outside. And some of these, where we have to sort of weigh these things accordingly, where I think this one is sort of a preference for what people would expect to see here or what's appropriate for the community. But then we have to weigh these against other needs that are coming up at different formats. And so you can say, yes, this is a preference that folks have here, but we can also recognize that some of these other things are much needed based on answers that we're seeing other places.
Blake, as you mentioned other places, regarding you and your staff as you're going through this so far, has there been any feedback, comments, suggestions that have been a big surprise to you or your team?
I think for us, I think anytime we step into a new place, the first thing that we're trying to figure out as we acclimate ourselves is what is similar to other places that we work, what relies on kind of the traditional ways that people like to live together in community, which typically informs best practices, versus what is really special here, or what is really unique here. I think the one thing that jumped out us is particularly unique here, and is an interesting challenge, is just the nature of the gate and having a sort of a wall that delineates public and private, and that how many facets, as we get into stakeholder engagement, this becomes a lot clearer of how that causes this interesting conceptual understanding of what some amenities are supposed to do, what is the role of things like commercial, where and how do people want to interact with each other, do people want to interact with people just behind the gate or on both sides of the gate? I think that's really the effects of that are really what I would say are the most unique facets of what we see here. Most everything else I think that we processed through is pretty typical things that we would expect to see once we understood the landscape here. Yeah, I think that this, as we talk about this, the community engagement reflects a lot of things that I would guess that you guys, as planning commissioners, as residents, as people who are just networking with other folks on the island, would probably expect to have seen. So I don't think this section is maybe as surprising as the stakeholder engagement, which we're going to cover right after this, where we're talking to folks who, in some capacity, might have less weight if we're thinking of them as one individual's opinion, but in other capacities are directly involved with really specific expertise and are driving very specific entities. And so in that way, they're sort of like understanding the weight of some of their commentary. So I think we'll get to some of that. This a little bit more forces us to ask hard questions then.
I think, though, most of the people who live on Kiowa and visit Kiowa go behind the gate. So that pretty much encompasses almost the entire population of the island.
Sure.
And this shows a very, very, very strong bias against other than single-family homes. And I think we have to respect that.
Well, I understand, I was looking at that too, but if you added, for example, townhomes, if you look at neutral and somewhat positive, they'll more, so I think we're bifurcated. I think our community is bifurcated into a single home community and the people living in the regimes.
Yeah, townhomes are different than multifamily building. Townhomes are low, you know, usually a couple of stories. The townhomes, something like Riverviews are townhomes, I think, aren't they? Or no, are they single
There are
family?
some.
There's some townhomes there.
And I think regarding the gate, Blake, I think some people see the gate as a sense of privacy, which appeals to them. For others, they see it as a sense of security, which appeals to them. And in many cases, both.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that that we were talking about a question of gate, yes or no, but I think we're talking about the level of nuance that it brings to the planning of almost everything from
Right.
public space to amenities. It just brings up really complex questions, as I'll say. That's where we're.
Don't you think that's a tactical problem? You know, strategically, we know what the solution is, but right now, it's a tactical problem that we gotta deal with. Strategically, we know we gotta make a different, we gotta handle it. You know, we've gotta create a solution for it. But, you know, tactically, we've got an immediate issue that's causing a lot of grief.
You're talking particularly about the congestion, the buildup at the gate.
The whole gate, the whole, yeah.
I think it speaks to the question of, if, I'm just gonna use one example, if we know that park space is an amenity or there's limited options that the town actually can do to drive that, right? So to your point, I think the solution is, how do you address the need with that nuance of public and private? So it's a bigger policy question that the town has to answer.
And I think one of the continual conversations that John and I have been having over the next month is who is the person to take some of these particular questions to, because of just the way that the oversight is split between the Maze of K's. There's certainly the things within the purview of the town, but then these things are sort of shared responsibilities, and what is it, you know, and really I think John and I have kept saying, what is it to make, and I think Michael, you were the one last time that we were here, kept just saying your mandate to make sure this comp plan is actionable and it's very clear what the next steps are, and I think we just want to make sure that the plan has teeth to take on some of these things, even when they might be not under the direct purview of the town, but maybe adjacent to, in partnership with some of these other institutions. So it's figuring out the complexity here with some of these. The gate is just one of those things that leads to that. Let's go. Okay. In considering Kiowa's existing commercial uses or non-residential areas, so really, what is the commercial value in terms of strength and weakness for the community today? The character of the commercial areas and mixed-use development was definitely seen as positive. We start to get really kind of in the neutral area when we talk about the mix of availability of shopping. So what is the stores? What is the mix that you have? Kind of neutraled out, pretty mixed positive and negative when it came to access to everyday goods and services. On a lot of these questions and the qualitative ones, we talked about folks having some things here, but also needing to drive for a lot of kind of everyday uses that they couldn't get at Freshfields or other places. Employment and sort of opportunities for new office, pretty neutral, with most folks actually choosing neutral. So I think most folks didn't feel strongly about that. When considering Kiowa's existing community facilities, identify if each of the following is a current strength or weakness. I will say with this one, this is probably the one where the qualitative and the quantitative answers are the most different. My guess is the way that people viewed this question was basically asking, oh, I'm sorry, it's not this one, it's sorry, the next one. This is the, I'm sorry. In terms of community facilities, this is more infrastructure and services. That's the next one. I'll give you that disclaimer on. But yeah, generally, public safety was seen as positive. Healthcare was mostly seen as negative, but obviously we know there's conversations about those. Availability of schools. Surprisingly, we had almost no one suggest that the lack of schools was a positive thing. There were more folks that skewed much more towards negative, that people thought the lack of schools was a negative thing.
I want to make a comment on that because I asked people about this question, and one of the consistent from people who do questionnaires, there should have been a not applicable. Because people said, okay, we don't have schools. Do I call that a strength or a weakness? I like that we don't have schools, so it's a strength. You can say that because we don't have a lot of kids here and that's not what our community is. Or you can say it's a well, I recognize it's a weakness because we don't have schools, but I like it that way, but I'll be honest and say it's a weakness. So it's a really bad question. There should have been a not applicable thing. By saying it's a weakness doesn't mean people want schools here.
Agree.
Okay. All right. The utilities, broadband, seen as relatively neutral. Water, trash, other things, start towards positive. The existing parks and recreation, this is the one where I was starting to give the previous disclaimer that I'll stick with. I think my guess here is that most folks were answering this as a statement about the quality of the places, because you have things like parks, sports fields, recreations, all leaning towards positives. But then within the answers, we're consistently seeing that people felt like a lot of those recreational amenities were currently overtaxed, that there was not enough of them, and that people were wanting more local amenities closer to home, kind of more of them, more robust places to casually meet and get together, like the parks. Informal community gathering places, that one came up again and again and again. Environmental features seen as positive, ADA seen here as neutral. When considering Kiowa's existing transportation networks, identify if each of the following is a strength or weakness. Conditions of the roadway was seen as generally good. Traffic very much skewed towards negative. Walkability is kind of neutral, maybe skews a little bit towards negative, which is interesting. This is where you start to see this answer came up many, many times where people felt like the pedestrian and bicycle facilities are good and they enjoy them, but at the same time, we many folks mentioning that they want walkability as part of Kiowa. And the takeaway for us is that when people were talking about, they were talking about the ability, I think, to walk to things as part of their everyday loop, or to be able to bike to things as part of their everyday life, as in that's how I get to the grocery store, as in the way that we think about, walkability and bikeability in other cities, which is oftentimes thinking about the reduction in individual automobile trips that's actually pulling people off the road and reducing congestion. And so didn't hear a lot of that type of thinking about walkability and bikeability as a primary mode. Access to interstate and to outside uses, fairly negative. Access to destinations outside the island skews towards negative. Access to regional transit, extremely negative. When considering Kiowa's culture and identity, identify if the following is a strength or weakness for the community today. The community character was a huge positive. The balance of the natural environment probably maybe answered the most positive of maybe any of the questions. Diversity of population, straight down the middle, neutral. Historic preservation and assets, skews towards positive. Arts and cultural offerings, middle, skews towards positive. Community events and festivals, positive. And so in general, we were kind of trying to sum up all of this from, reading all of these answers. I think this was the kind of the big picture summary that we pulled from community engagement. Affordable and experiential food options, whether it be grocery, restaurants, cafes, coffee shops, village-like small business retail, easier access to everyday needs, seamless integration of buildings with nature, thoughtful mix of housing options. I don't think necessarily here, this one was talking about the full housing typology range. I think it was just talking about different types of houses located in different places on the island with relationship to some of these civic uses. This wasn't necessarily saying get townhouses or multifams. Casual places to gather, mobility options that support ease of travel, development sensitive to natural ecosystems, actionable measures against climate change, a greater network of travel and leisure paths, expanded access to clubhouse amenities, a wider range of cultural arts and entertainment activities, and easier access to nearby medical facilities. I think when we took all 10,000 answers, these are the things coming through different questions. This was the group that rose to the top that were said the most. Anything on there that surprises y'all, that shocks y'all?
I don't think so.
Okay. So moving into stakeholder engagement, as I said, we had 26 of these sessions. Most were 1 to 2 folks. We had a couple more that were larger, so ended up chatting with a number of folks from a number of entities. Y'all saw the spreadsheet, so I think y'all know who all was represented. The following 10 slides are then divided and organized by the 10 categories by which the state plan requires for comp plans. And so it's just us beginning to start to group like things so that we can sort of translate those. This was, the big one that we heard over and over again through thought, many different ways, that the island is moving away from a part-time resort to a full-time community. Really just heard again and again the difference in those nouns, the difference in resort and community, and all the different ways that you would think about that.
Have we tested that? I mean, is that
Yes.
an impression, or have we tested that? Do we have the data that shows that it's happening that way?
So what we've understood, and this comes from numerous different metrics, whether it's the economic data that we're getting from Edens, from other folks, from residents, from population, every number that we could look at. If we think about the former ups and downs and swings of off-season, down season, there was sort of a higher and a low. The whole thing is shifted up in an absolute way because of the build-out that's occurred. Obviously, in recent years, it continues to be this fast build-out of the island. But we're also learning that the downside of the swing is disappearing more and more in sort of a post-COVID full-time occupancy. So that was really an interesting question that came up again and again, because if you think about the old curve, you said, what number did you plan for? Did you plan for 75%, so at peak capacity, things feel a little bit overcrowded, or do you plan for the very top? But if the whole thing is moved up, and if the bottom has shifted as well, as far as an absolute move in terms of a number that we would plan for, it's probably a pretty significant move. And
So we've tested it, and we do know that there are more full-time residents now than there were 5 years ago.
It'd be easy to look at the voter registration, because once you're a full-time resident, you've registered for voters. So
It's
we
higher,
should
I
be-
know, we got,
One portion, I think also the part-timers spend more time.
okay, that's another.
That's another, but for, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to
But I
make sure
think
that this is.
full-time would be easy to get the statistic
Yeah,
based
I
on
just
the
want to make
voter
sure it's not
registration.
anecdotal, that that it's not just people are just remembering COVID.
Next phase is that data analysis is pulling that specific data into this
Okay.
process. So
Okay.
this is more the qualitative things that we've heard. I confirm, I think that trend definitely is,
Do we have, I don't know, do we have 2020 census data yet?
yes, 2020 census data has been completed.
Yeah, I think to get an accurate number, you also got to work into the equation the number of people that leave the island each year, that are full-time, that are moving closer to children, grandchildren, retirement facilities, or whatever. So I remember when I moved here 15 years ago, we were told it was a 80-20. 20% of the homes were only lived in full-time. I don't know whether that's now 70-30 or what. And only that, I think the only real way to find out would be the tax records.
I think it's closer to like 65 now. I mean, I went maybe 70 is a little higher, but I think it's not a 50-50, it's not a 60-40.
That'd be easy again by the real estate records, who's paying local taxes and who's out of state. Those numbers should exist.
As I said, that's part of the intake process of this.
I'll say that this particular answer was fed by numerous different sources. I mean, this is coming from chatting with Kiawah Island Real Estate that said you'll see this on the additional slide later, that said they have really a new demographic that's looking at the island, for the first time in recent years, post-COVID. They have people that are still working, who are moving out here to live here in a full-time capacity. Quite different numbers they were looking at, chatting with the resort and other folks who said that all of their amenities are being used year-round. We have Edens telling us, and the LN both telling us the only dips that they experience right now is January. The rest of the year is high. So really every every person that we can talk about use, occupation, they're talking about the dip has disappeared. And really they're not seeing the swings that previously existed in the resort capacity.
And I think probably we would all agree with that, but it is soft and it's anecdotal, and it would be so easy to get some hard data to support that I think it would be a good next step.
Great. Yep. And that's definitely part of the ways that we are required to report back for this.
That also holds true on your last point, the population is aging. I think it was recently, was it the Key Island Real Estate that they just sent something out about the percentage, how many more young people are coming in? I mean, as Bill said, people age out. I know numerous people who've moved to Bishop Gadsden, have moved to be near their children or grandchildren, and those houses have turned over to the 50-somethings. So I think that's wrong, saying the population is aging, because that's a normal way that we are, quote unquote, mostly a retirement community, and when we all get too old to live in our houses, we're going to move, and somebody younger is going to move in. So I don't think the whole population is aging in place.
Good point.
And just as a reminder, kind of as the disclaimer that was written on the top of this when we shared it, this is quotes from individuals. These have not been adjusted by us. This is us reporting back what we've heard. So I think this is just saying that in general, the statement was made by multiple people that really I think the stronger statement here was that some long-term residents have been here and that the support mechanisms to sustain long-term aging in place are not all present. So I don't think this was saying like me making a statement about the whole population. The number of employees on the islands, we see 4,000 during peak season. Economic development, real estate interest is extremely high, but with new and different demographics, it was previously stated. Island employment is an extreme challenge. This, to the earlier question, this might have been, actually this might have been one of the most shocking or just unexpected answers that we heard. And again, there's not a single employer who didn't talk about the pretty significant challenges that they're having in recruiting and retaining employees, and unique, pretty extreme measures that they're having to do to retain folks, to pay their way, to drive to the island, to pay for their housing, all of the efforts that are being taken on to keep good people. Everyone did explain it as a pretty desperate times. No one felt good about that in any way. No one felt comfortable about it anyway. Mentioned this before, it's no longer an off-season. I mean, just multiple times this, what is the expansion of fresh fields? The question is almost coming up, and as is the following question, almost in a little bit of a philosophical way. It is unclear who it is for, and if Kiowa should take a stand on it in any way to sort of make sure it is something that serves Kiowa, or that it is appropriate to or respectful of Kiowa. A lot of questions came about that in different capacities. What is the role of commercial retail? This is some of what I was alluding to earlier. Again and again and again, we heard people saying there's a need for more commercial retail in and around the island, people wanting walkable things closer to their homes, people wanting kind of what they thought of as kind of small town retail all around them. But that is really complicated for, our role as a planner as we're thinking about economic development. It does make it complicated to talk about the addition of that when all of those metrics that are used to drive new development is catchment and drive to and who can access it. And so it becomes really complicated if you're saying, oh, we need new commercial things, but if the gate is closed to folks, what is the role of the gate there? Is if anyone's coming to spend money, they can get through, or what? And so that's where I was kind of just talking about. It's just an issue of a complexity that needs to be thought through. The town needs to communicate with the resort about future commercial needs, supporting residents. This came up again and again. To the role of commercial retail, it was made 100% clear that everyone kind of expects that the resort is the one who's delivering any of those. The resort is obviously the largest landholder of undeveloped land, and they have already kind of the prime property for co-locating additional commercial needs if they were going to do so. So if the town has any vested interest in trying to talk about what residents might want, the town should be staging that conversation with the resort, and that came up.
In lieu of expanding fresh fields?
What's that?
This is in lieu of expanding fresh fields?
This was saying for purposes behind the gate. I mean, with the continual refrain of people saying that they want more commercial options, numerous people were talking about walkability and having them close to homes in a way that implied
I guess
things
I'm
behind the
following,
gate.
I'm following the Madeline, is that, that's a soft number, numerous. What is numerous?
What is what? I'm sorry.
What is numerous?
Oh, I mean,
Okay, you don't have to answer, I'm just saying, that's a very, very soft number.
And that's where we need community involvement, because the stakeholder groups, you know, so if this was mentioned numerous times by different stakeholder groups, it wasn't groups of residents, you know, because you talk to the Conservancy and St. John's Fire and Kika and the partners and the resort, but that's not the people. So I think we need to know more of, do the people really want more commercial behind the gate? And I'd say maybe they don't. I don't know.
I think the intent there behind that particular comment more so is not necessarily when you think about commercial and it's, what I gathered from that is the areas of the island where pockets of people can get to a relatively close need for an amenity. So those who are, we've heard it, those who are in Ocean Park have to drive a ways out to get to Freshfields for a gallon of milk or something of that nature. So is there opportunity here to more centralize pockets of area, which in this particular case, that's already been done. Town Center is that area where people can kind of congregate for those small kind of commercial. The word commercial, I think, is the hang up here. I don't think it's like putting in office buildings and that type of thing, but it's centralizing aggregated activity of more intense uses. So think about in West Beach, where we have the conference center, you have the clubhouse, and the future plans for whatever the resort does there. That becomes sort of a community commercial hub, if you will. So that's already in the DNA of Kiowa. It's just, I think, where residents want to be able to feel closer, be able to get to those more accessible. So I don't think it's saying that we want to erase or to your question there of saying, okay, Freshfields, diminishing the size of Freshfields to place it on behind the gates, but it's utilizing those properties available to more so pinpoint if West Beach has now the nature center, the community pool area, and whatever amenities they have there. That's a central gathering location that creates economic activity, if you will, opposed to I can go there and get a glass of wine or a gallon of milk and not have to go to Freshfields. So it's a fair statement, I think, not saying that all residents want more commercial behind the gates. I don't want to send that message at all.
Yeah, and they're not, like you mentioned, Ocean Park. I don't think you've met with a group of Ocean Park residents to ask them what they think. They now can go to Marsh House, they can buy little things there if they want to.
Yeah, that's the
But the point is, this comment made it in here, but your Ocean Park is the farthest community out. Have you asked them what they think?
No, the comment was that the town needs to communicate with the resort in those amenity areas. I think that's where to drive what happens in those areas. So
And that's actually not the resort.
Ocean
Park is not the
No, I'm talking about the West Beach. West Beach and where the
And
town
East
center is.
Beach.
I think we should
East
ask
Beach
the
North.
resort to put a Circle K in.
Don't forget the mini golf.
I mean, I'll also say,
We're on bowling.
We're getting bowling.
I'll also say as we try to fold all this together, I mean, some of this is trying to connect the dots between lots of different comments. So when we hear walkability a lot, walkability for us as a definition is a finite number of a 5 to 10 minute walk area from someone's home. And we have folks requesting, expecting certain amount of.
I'm sorry, I wanted to add to that point there, when you mentioned the word walkability, because I think about the conversations of how Kiowa was developed, and I think that is probably absent of what people really conceptualize from a walkability standpoint. So all those amenities around those concentrated points, these are around the areas where most of the visitors are. So where most of the guests occur, this is not necessarily areas of where single-family home residentials are. So those where the villas are and those concentrated areas of activity, those are where we really want, in my opinion, to see the availability of more walkable options, because that's the people who are experiencing the island to And so I think about it in all of the conversations of all the development that has occurred in planning, either with the master developer or the resort, a 5-minute walk that's drawn around, that's kind of the planning activity that occurred for these areas. And so if you live in one of those areas and you can walk to the West Beach area, or you can walk to East Beach, that's the kind of thing that we're referencing here in this whole walkability aspect of Kiowa. And it's connecting that with our existing fabric of our network of trails and systems. And I think that's what needs to be pulled out of that section more broadly.
And one revision that you might want to consider is to put walkability/bikeability, because real life on this island is not people walking to the nest. Everybody gets on their bikes and bikes to the nest. So, but I think for clarity purposes, you want to do that. That's how people move from.
It's, yeah. And the whole section 8 is mobility, so we'll cover that in depth.
Yeah, and also, you're focusing then on the walkability for the more densely populated portions of the island. Because you're not going to have, behind the second gate, you're really not going to get walkability because it's a big island, and people who move there know that.
That's what I kind of just
Yeah.
And I think John is wise to say that the word commercial here could also be just substituted for civic amenities as well, whether that's a park, whether that's kind of just any type of informal gathering place. Those types of places, whether they're commercial entities or just civic spaces, were requested by many people and kind of talked about in relationship to easily accessible places. So planning both commercial and civic assets, we do think about some of those kind of walkable, bikeable circles. And I think that's where this push and pull starts to happen with the comp planning process, is because you can talk about things where people are saying, that they don't want to drive places, that congestion's crazy, they want to be able to walk and bike. And then you can also talk about, not wanting to further develop or change things. And so it's really kind of understanding the push and pull of what some of those things are, of getting more people on bikes, getting more people walking is the way to reduce traffic, and it's what people are kind of asking for lifestyle-wise, is a way to move around the island. So is there a slight change in shift in mentality of saying, oh, some things can be clustered around each other, kind of to make some kind of little activity nodes? Yes, new construction will slow down in 2 to 3 years. That was just the notion of that. This is under economic development because it's thinking about the way that the town's income stream is not picking up taxes. What does that mean? How is the town forecasting its revenue, which is 2 questions down. And the question was asked of how the town can incentivize redevelopment in the future for unused, outdated, or underdeveloped properties. This is thinking about once this new construction drops off in 2 to 3 years, what will be the revenue for the town? How will it be supporting itself? So lots of questions around that. It did come up that one opportunity for long-term economy is embracing tourism more. It wasn't stated exactly what that would entail, but there were questions asked about, if there is, the resort is expanding commercial more for their purposes or others. Is there different ways that some of the things should be thought about, whether that's day trips or other things as well? So that was just a question that's come up.
Came up like once in one of the stakeholder meetings?
I think particularly around these questions of forecasting revenue, I think thinking about the financial viability of the town, what are the options? I think that this is where all these things get complex, because then it was asking questions about, it led to questions about annexation, about the expansion of Freshfields, about other things. What does it mean to thinking about economic vitality of the town itself?
Because I think if you polled all the residents and you guys weigh in, I don't think the majority of residents here want to embrace more tourism. In day tripping type things. The resort, people come here, they come to play golf, that's great, but I don't think we want to create things for someone from Johns Island just come spend the day at Kiowa. That adds to our traffic and, you know, people live here, and I don't think that's something they want us
Don't
to.
you think it'd be quaint to have horse-drawn carriages taking people driving around?
Or Jeep Safari.
Yeah, I remember those.
We're closer to the horses than they are downtown.
But I think that's what worries me about this list. Again, it's not quantified how many people, you know, some of these things I can imagine, and some of us sat in on some of the sessions, so we know that maybe one person said that.
The thought, I want to be clear, and I think maybe it's being misrepresented here, but the information that's being presented here is what we heard. You see what I'm saying? So it's not saying that it's right or wrong. It's saying this is what we heard. And so the next phase of this process, we will continue to essentially follow everything that we've heard to make sure that it represents people.
Yeah, this is also in the stakeholders, so I think you're not gonna,
There's some important, who are usually represented by a smaller, representative for that particular stakeholder. So you may only heard it once, but still may have a lot of impact because it may be an important stakeholder.
And this is truly that question is a follow-up to the question immediately before it of just how is the town figuring out its revenue stream in 2 to 3 plus years, and what all does it want to be part of it for its economic health. And so I think that's where that came out of. I think the question was, there are so many resort amenities here, and there is adjacency to so many resort dollars that are very, very close at hand. And from an economic development perspective, which this is the page that we're on, that could be one way to connect it. I agree that if you ask most residents that they probably don't want more tourism, but this is also could be conceptually, if we're thinking about it going forward, it could be something that's more controlled in some way that's on resort property or is regulated in some capacity. It doesn't mean, tourists just roaming free around the island, but it's just talking about as a potential income stream. What is the future of Rhett's Bluff? Many folks kind of alluded to feeling like it's not performing at highest and best use to serve economic development needs. There's some additional bandwidth for hotels. Moving to natural resources and environment. Kiowa's relationship to nature is, it says a key here. I might even say the key reason folks come here. Mentioned, countless times. But it was noted again and again that the relationship feels very fragile these days. People feel like there's a lot of parts of the environment that are threatened and are unsure if all the protections are in place for long-term health and resilience. There was a lot of discussions about finding balance with nature, that living with nature was important, not living in it. That really it's about balance and not trying to preserve nature exactly in an untapped way. That someone mentioned living inside nature is scary. I remember that comment, but really just finding that balance. The sense that design with nature has to be foregrounded. The design with nature concept, it sort of seems like known, but it seems like it's really lacking teeth for it to be carried out in various capacities by either kind of leading bodies or by individuals. Is followed up with the next one, which this came out again and again and again, is this real need for environmental education, a real sense that people with their mouths say that they are pro-environment, and then when it comes to asking kind of small day-to-day actions, that they are not necessarily following through in all the ways that could be beneficial to the island's environmental health long-term. Very, very much related is the next point, which is how do we get folks to act on the environmental pieces, particularly with their wallets, with the lack of taxes being able for the town to be something to leverage, to offer incentives. Really, pretty much any environmental topic that we talk to feels like at some point it's hitting a little bit of a wall in terms of not having ability to kind of compel or impel folks to act. So figuring out what that means. A number of folks mentioned rain gardens as what they thought was kind of a low-hanging fruit to really get some buy-in from residents in order to help them understand designing with nature, cheap solutions, ready to go now. The Conservancy's listed out how to do that. There's a list of critical environmental issues that seem like they are not yet being addressed. This is the kind of the summary in the document that was sent out. All of these kind of were listed here individually. There were questions about what is the new green initiative. I wasn't exactly sure what this, I believe this came from Michael talking about this. It had come up at a retreat, and it felt like it was something that was trying to put meat on the bones of what that is. How does the town and the developer strike a balance with the Conservancy when the Conservancy's goal is really to preserve as much land as possible? That kind of came up as an interesting push and pull there. It feels like it could be addressed with the comp plan. It's sort of moving into, I'm jumping to the last one, really, the sense that the comp plan can be the thing that suggests new projects for the Conservancy that the Conservancy can manage with the town's economic support, financial support of that. And then what those particular goals are, the Conservancy has lots of thoughts. So which of those does the town have an appetite in getting behind?
Wait, before you get off of that, I'm just reading some of the detail that we were provided on this. You know, striking the balance with the Conservancy, I assume means the Conservancy would like permanent protection for areas along the beach besides just state regulations. Is that something we can do with new zoning ordinances? I don't know. That might be something to look at. Also, it says, how are the Conservancy goals adopted to change harmful practices? I mean, I know many of us don't use the bad rodenticides. We weren't allowed to ban them, but there was a list that came out and most people are saying we're just going to use guys who do bobcat-friendly things. It says the golf course reducing pesticides and fertilizer to change its effects on downstream ecosystems. Currently, the resort will not share with them, I assume that means the Conservancy, the chemicals they're using. Is there any way we can impact that to find out? I mean, I think the resort is generally a good neighbor. So I was surprised to read that they wouldn't share this because I assume as good neighbors, they shouldn't be wanting to poison our environment. But that's something, I don't know if we can put in the plan or that we can the town council, can there be ordinances to legislate that?
And again, we'll get to solutions going forward, but certainly that, and I don't, this was chatting with the Conservancy. No one looked at us and said the resort is being obstinate and is completely unwilling to share. I think it was just up to this point, they've not been willing to share. So I don't think it suggested that any higher power has gone to them and asked and they have refused to do so. I think it was more. What's that? They have, got it. Okay, there we go. Yeah, certainly the plan can, and this goes back to when we get to governance, is really just aligning these major stakeholders and asking how the town can, what is the role of the comp plan in trying to align the various priorities across these different organizations so that while the town may not have oversight of these other entities, it can compel them to act if there's an understanding of sort of shared interest. And I think the degree to which the comp plan has those teeth to act for these other organizations is going to be an interesting discussion. Lost my place. Okay. Cultural resources and amenities. We're just trying to.
Section.
Oh.
Okay.
Kiowa's culture is a mix of a few things. We heard this in different ways, but someone was summing this up really nice in these 5 points of this mixer of resort, of nature, of family, of healing, and community. And I thought that was a really interesting summary of that. Kiowa's culture is lacking in some ways in terms of some of its cultural offerings. History came up a few times as a place of maybe finally Kiowa's kind of old enough to start telling its history, including the modern development of it. The culture of Kiowa has always been responsive and changing, but COVID has driven this big time. This is sort of a twofold comment. One, that it has always been responsive and changing, that it's not been kind of stagnant is one thing, and then also just noticing how different some of these things are post-COVID in terms of what we were mentioning earlier, in terms of this full-time occupation of more of a community orientation than off-season, on-season resort orientation. As such, as I mentioned, the next one, it is a full-time community, but it lacks some of the trappings of a fully formed community, of some of these kind of everyday needs being met in an accessible manner. People are having to go outside Kiowa to have a number of needs met. Some of the amenities that the island has historically needed are coming down the pipeline. Just as you know, I've said a few times, the medical offerings, hopefully with MUSC, with the expanded grocery store. So we saw a lot of those complaints, knowing that some people didn't understand those. The need for more food and beverage is particularly pronounced. Really, the complaint over with Freshfields is just that it takes forever to find seats there during dinner, that all the club, resort utilities, clubhouse, restaurant offerings, that there's 2 to 3 seatings at dinner, that all those things feel particularly taxed. I think it was noted on the further breakdown. Just an interesting note is that there's only one beach-facing food and beverage place. Was mentioning that.
That's not true. What about the restaurant at Ocean Course? That's a public restaurant, and that faces the ocean.
What else is there?
This says it's, they're talking that it's the club member, the beach club, but the restaurant at the Ocean Course is beach facing.
Okay.
And so is the ocean room at Sanctuary. So that's just not true.
I think that the comment was more just in thinking that at other places that's like the prime places for a lot of these food and beverage offerings, and then there might be some more opportunity.
But that's not Kiowa, and that's where we're unique.
Again, the need for additional amenities, activities, and programs. The need for gathering places that are civic in nature. I heard that numerous times, that the places that feel kind of the most public, that feel the most multi-use, are the most successful, that the special sauce of the Nest and other places were just being multi-use, multi-person, diversity of times of days, of users, really that places like that have done well. There was a notion that stuff out Ocean Park, sort of the in-between interstitial park space, that those homes are selling for 150% more than the stuff on the external, because people really want to relate to that more civic park space on the internal side there.
Say that again.
That we heard this when we were chatting with Mark, that the homes that were originally sold out there at Ocean Park, that they sort of evaluated the ones on the external side to be the ones that would be the more expensive ones, and then as it's mathematically fed out, that the ones that are on the inside relating to the park space are actually going for 150% or 50% more over the value of the others, and that the demand heard from real estate folks is that people want to relate more to the internal civic stuff than they do the external kind of nature looking outwards way.
I'll leave that for now, but I question that. We'll talk about that.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, but the comment of people wanting to be close to amenities and be close to, they want more civic amenities and be close to them in a walkable way, came up lots of different ways. Obviously, I think you all know full well the conversations around the Cultural Center. It's come up multiple times. Obviously, kind of been mentioning this with these cultural amenities. It was noted that anytime it's been framed as entertainment, it's been kind of immediately shut down. So there's a fine line there of figuring out what that is. And then just the same note again about living close to shared amenities.
Our liaison, Michael, has a question.
Yeah, can't wait with this. You have to go through every single page, okay, and clarify what the town versus the community versus Toki really means, right? So you're using these 3 words, town, small town, the town, Toki, etc., in a way that I feel is very confusing and can be read immediately with misunderstanding, right? So, for example, in your last slide on the previous section that you were reporting on, page 30, you were saying you don't have to go back, but you were saying the town of Kiowa expressed a desire for. That's not correct, because this is the summary of everything you heard from the community. That's a big difference, right? Or when you say here, for example, I think, no, the next page, you were already on this page. The town and its culture are missing a performance arts center cultural hub. That's not true. When you say the town with town being a capital T, I interpret this as the town of Kiowa Island, Toki. That's not true. So please go through all of these pages and make sure that you define the rule between when are you really talking about the town. For example, on one of the prior pages, you are saying the town, how does the town estimate its revenue stream? I think there you clearly talk about the institution of the town of Kiowa Island. Here, when you're saying, I think you're talking more about the community.
This was in fact
So,
town staff mentioning that it felt like it was asking questions. Its role was to think about performing arts.
yeah, but I'm sorry if the town, okay, I understand where this came from, but then I can't imagine that the town staff was saying that we town staff are missing a performing arts center, right? They were probably saying we as a community are missing.
Right.
So just to avoid misunderstandings, right from the very beginning, please go through all of these pages and make sure that you just define a nomenclature. Whenever you talk about the organization of the town of Kiowa Island, maybe use Toki. Otherwise, use the community or something. But make it clear, because otherwise people will misinterpret this.
Sure.
Okay?
And again, this is, if you're going to turn it down for today, it was 2 levels in, so.
Yeah, but today is a public
This
meeting.
is a public meeting.
This is a public meeting, and this document will be on our website.
Yeah, so.
Right? And there will be people reading this, and they will start misinterpreting some of this.
It's part of the interview process. So it's part of the process. So I get where you're going to make those changes.
Before you put it on the website, just make sure, please, that we don't have, again, emails coming because people are misinterpreting things.
And feel free, I'm happy for you to jump in and ask with any of these if you need clarification. Happy to help.
Well, to that point, will there be a review process of suggestions that were made at this meeting that will allow us to ensure that some of the suggestions we made are incorporated into a revised document?
All right, so I just want to reset today because I think we're getting hung up on a lot of details for today, and I have to reset the expectations of what today's presentation is about. The information that's being shared today is what was gathered through the community survey and through the stakeholder listening sessions. This is not to present this information and say that this is the absolute representation of what it will be part of the actual plan. It's to provide the powers that be, in this particular case, our planning commission at this stage of the process, the opportunity to see what has the community been responding to so far? How do they feel about certain things? As part of this overall public engagement process, this will be refined. So the comments are well received in the nuance of what needs to occur in the next stage, but I do not want us to go into a phase of finitely saying that this comment is inappropriate or this comment is not inappropriate, because
Right.
that will occur during the process of the workshop. Of the comprehensive plan update. We will refine, I've been making notes during this entire process, so we will make the changes that have been suggested. But I don't want to be misrepresented here in saying that every particular comment that's on a slide is in fact what represents of this entity, that entity, or the entire community. For those who were part of the listening sessions, that was one of the disclaimers that was representative at the beginning of every listening session, that these comments that you're provided, it could be representative of you, your individual self, your entity that you're representing, or the role that you play in connecting to that. So we know it was going to be a mixture of feedback that we got from the stakeholder session. The most important component of this information is the value of the qualitative, the qualitative component of this, and saying, what are the true challenges that we are facing? What are the true challenges that we're facing? And if we're have the ability to identify what are the true challenges, then we begin to be able to set what are the goals that we put into this vision for Kiowa. So I think that what I want to do is just be able to, I use Blake's word just a moment ago, level set from where we were at the beginning of this process and saying our 2015 comprehensive plan, where our vision was, where we are today in 2023, what are our expectations for the town? The town in itself is representative of the entire community. And so I do agree with you, Michael, that the capitalization of where it may be misrepresented of saying, hey, that's not the mayor and town council speaking and say this is our official position, but it's in this particular essence trying to capture a statement that's saying, hey, the town needs to evaluate this particular issue as part of, because we are the holders, we're the holders of this plan.
If that's the case, then for example, use tool.
Yeah, and I said, yeah, and so I said, we will make those changes.
Or what you guys heard, as in reference to we as a community, that we may be better not used to it. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying to change any of the verbatim, because it's the input that we receive. I just want to caution you to make sure that when people are reading this, they really understand what it means. And a capital T versus a small t, and Toki versus community can make a big difference in terms of
So
how
the,
we read it.
yeah,
Understand.
and I said that the intent here is for us to gather information. So we will continue to gather information, gather feedback to digest all of this. But I don't want to get messed up in this process today of saying that we're trying to right the ship of making the plan perfect today, because it's all part of the process. What I've gathered so far today is that there are some missing elements that we need to prioritize, and I'll share what I've summary after Blake finishes, but I felt the need to step in to make sure that we stay on track of getting through this to understand the goal of today.
And I think then it would be worth your while to note on it that the items aren't in any particular order. They're not in order of priority, so people reading it understand that the one at the top isn't what most people said, for example. That needs to be noted, since you said they were in no particular order, so anything that goes out
Yeah,
should
and
say that.
that's one of the notations that I've written down, that this comprehensive list, and that information was shared with you all, that this is a summary of all of the feedback that we've gotten. So when rankings, in my opinion, well, I won't comment into that, but understanding that as far as rankings, I don't use the word rankings, as far as prioritizing, we're prioritizing these based on the elements within the comprehensive plan. So that's really what I want your focus at today, is to say, well, is there something missing from the natural resources element? Is there something missing from the housing element, from what we've gathered? Because at the end of the day, all of this input that we're receiving, it has to be tangibly connected to an element goal. And so all of our 9, 10 elements that we will produce as part of this plan, that's the goal of today. And I think I could have done a better job of communicating that to y'all, but I think that the important piece that I don't want to leave from this room right now is all of these different feedback that we're hearing, it has to be able to be connected to one of those elements. So when you're thinking about housing and population, economic development, as such right now we're talking about cultural resources, that's where I need your brain to say, is there something missing from what we're hearing around cultural resources that's representative, whether it's the resort speaking, whether it's the conservancy speaking, whether it's a resident who lives in Ocean Park? Would that be something, a need, or a need that fits into that bucket?
And I ask whether we will have the opportunity to see a revised version of this with the kind of changes that Michael has suggested.
Except why would, this is an unedited, unvalidated, unprioritized feed data dump from what we've gotten from when we did these. So
Exactly.
I don't know why we would revise. This is what they said, but it's unedited. As long as we put the disclaimer up front, it's unedited, unvalidated, and unprioritized.
One of the things that was important from LS3P in this particular process was for them not to come in and say, hey, this was what was shared with us, and then we came in and started changing things without presenting what was shared. So that's part of the transparency in this process of saying, this is what was shared with our consultant team, and before we actually begin to put this on paper, we want to present that to everyone.
Because it says like residents prefer to live closer to shared amenities. Most of the stakeholder groups weren't per se residents, so that's where we want to have.
And again, Ms.
Because
Hennessy.
that's made as it presents as a fact that,
Yeah, I think what I'm saying, John says, don't
Give a lot of,
take this for what it's worth. It's just some more data that we're getting, another source of data that we're getting. So I think we're trying to maybe run with this a little prematurely.
agree. Thanks for the clarity, John.
I'll also, I appreciate it, John. I'll also say that just in preparation for what the next steps will be is thinking about big decisions and the types of trade-offs that may come along with those, and kind of having a really well-rounded picture of things. I'll give you a specific example, and please don't get caught up in the content of the specific thing. I'm more talking about the idea of trade-offs, but we've done a few communities that we work with before where there's been an area of undeveloped land adjacent to homes, and folks have come in and we've said, what do you want it to be? And they all started out saying single-family homes, and we have an activity that we do that helps them understand the understanding between density and amenities, that amenities were always correlated with density. Everything has a catchment on it in terms of how many folks it needs to have in the area. And every time that we've done that activity, folks have started out with single-family homes, and we said, if you get denser, you slide up the density scale. The trade-offs is that you get more amenities, you get parks, you get more stores, you get to a point, you get a grocery store. Every single time when compared with those trade-offs, people slide way over, and all of a sudden they want kind of mid-rise buildings in their neighborhood because they want the amenities with them. So every decision that the comp plan is going to have is going to be facing this complexity of interwoven things. And so it's helpful to understand the trade-offs. If we do this, then there's this. And so we're kind of trying to paint the picture of these different things, of understanding there's economic needs, there's environmental needs, there's cultural needs, and really thinking about those before we get into any decision making with those types of trade-offs.
I think if you also, if you're right, Larry, that this is just sort of a data dump. I think when it is posted, it would also be helpful to say these are, comments made by the stakeholder, and list the stakeholder groups that you talked with. You're not attributing it to anybody, but people then know, oh, okay, you didn't talk to all the people who live in Mariners Watch, if I happen to live in Mariners Watch or live in Ocean Park or wherever. So they'll understand that if they have an opinion that is the same or different, we're going to give them the opportunity to add to this.
Okay.
Go ahead, Blake.
I think we got all that one. Boom, community facilities. This is more physical facilities, infrastructure, and with it is governance. There's a need for better coordination between the island's major stakeholders, the Maze of K's, or however we want to define the major stakeholders. The idea was floated for a quarterly meeting of these groups to get together to exchange information, priorities, just kind of all get on the same page. It was stated by a few folks that Kiowa is playing some roles that would be better taken on by the town. It was noted that the resort is taking on some roles that probably could be better coordinated with the town. I think that some of those are better broken down on the page that you'll have. There is a need to define, clarify, and consolidate communications to the greater community. This came up multiple times with multiple stakeholders of feeling like there's not a clear, definitive way to communicate outwardly for a lot of these things, and that a lot of information gets dropped because there's kind of a confusing amount of channels and not any type of hierarchy. Really a sense that all facilities and infrastructure are beyond capacity at this point. Utility trying to get more water from the county, roads being overtaxed, all those components. There are real questions about law enforcement that came up multiple times of who should be taking on that role, if there's a sufficient amount at this time. There was not a sense that there are major crime issues going on, but really kind of oversight of law enforcement going into the future, what makes sense. The town should be providing and programming some park space and or open space. This came up in a few different ways. But then the immediate following bullet point is just that any kind of parks and open space are obviously complicated or a potential hot button issue with regards to the gate. So here is that issue again of things that folks maybe expected that would fall under the town's purview around some kind of open space planning, events, other things, but are complicated by that issue. There is the sense that the county does not pay attention to Kiowa. This came up on a few different things around governance, around things like feeling like the town does not involved in communications around Betsy Carson Parkway, or really, I mean, even going beyond that, I think kind of all of the Bohicket, or just really kind of the route that the number of folks are coming in. Then cell service on the east end of the island is problematic. We'll mention that later again. And whose responsibility is that was sort of questioned there. Housing, not a lot has come up through multiple things with housing. This is normally a bigger topic, but I think the amount of housing that's come online in recent years and the ways that it's been sort of governed by new development means that it's kind of been controlled to respond to the market. There was mentioned that there's a kind of one community type that might be mesh well mixed with the current lifestyle of the island, of the kind of these consolidated rental communities that have some of their own things that's missing here. And there were folks who were mentioning that as a way to have friends, family, other folks to relate to, kind of interact with them and come visit them different ways. Workforce housing was cited as a critical need by every single employer that we talked to. The math just doesn't work for a lot of employees to drive to make their way down here. It was noted again and again that as St. John's, as other places close by have developed more and more, even the places that were kind of the nearest affordable places where employees could live are just getting farther and farther away. The roads getting more and more congested, making commuting times more difficult. And really number of different facets, from emergency response to utilities. We're talking about the fact that some of their systems were slightly reliant upon employees living close by, and so some of those did become problematic. Obviously, this was one of those ones this is a great example of where these trade-offs come into play, where when we were looking at the graph of the community feedback of people saying workforce housing, people were quite opposed to it, but now you have employers saying, it's really, they're in a desperate place and they really, really need this stuff. So, how do the trade-offs work? How do you potentially build it and regulate it? Is there, a location that makes sense? A lot of questions around that.
Under workforce housing, one of the bullet points we have here, the second to the last one, after that last fiasco, the conversation is now just being intentionally ignored. I had no idea what that was talking about.
There was, I think it was maybe, oh gosh, I'm trying to think it was maybe related to Endo West. At some point, someone could maybe help me out, there was a discussion of workforce housing that had come up, and there was a sense that it was a kind of a hard-fought battle, and that since that time, people have just said.
Okay, so this was about workforce, okay.
Yeah, if you remember the original proposal for Andel West included residential, there was an outcry of, will that include affordable units? And I think that's relative to that.
The comment was that prior to that time, it felt like it was a discussion that was in the air, but after that discussion, it feels like it's sort of been a taboo subject of sorts.
So I'm surprised, there's been a latent issue for years now, it's captured under redevelopment, that there's, that a lot of the neighborhoods are now, some of the neighborhoods are reaching 40 years old, 40 plus years old. I'm surprised that there's no comments relative to redevelopment, future redevelopment.
There are, in what capacity? It was talked about from an economic development standpoint. It was talked about from the standpoint of how to regulate it. Are you talking about how to incentivize it?
If there was under the economic, I think we should add it to the housing.
Okay. It was noted just that some of these home sizes are present safety problems, and there's just a note. land use, zoning, and regulation. Obviously, I think you'll know this, there is a fear of new development that still exists on the island. This seems to be stated again and again that there's sort of a disconnect between the known future build out of the island and kind of a desire for people to kind of freeze it as where it is. Separately, there's a fear of rising development outside the island of adjacent communities and the effects that it's causing in terms of congestion, in terms of new development that may not be congruent with sort of the way Kiowa sees itself, for the way that people enter and drive through on their roads here. There's a real need, I think, for people to talk about kind of an information campaign to understand the new development. Here, I think this is meant to be a Toki quote of that the town needs to state that the development will occur and that will follow existing regulations. I think some of the fear was that an unknown that new development was coming and unsure if it was going to be regulated. It was a fear that seems to exist in people's minds, so knowing that there are controls for that and sort of information to be sent out. There may be a need for new regulation. That was asked, the question of yes, the new development will occur and follow existing regulations, but is the existing regulations appropriate? Should the comp plan be making changes to any build-out regulation? There was many conversations had about ARB, about the existing negative stigma that exists amongst a lot of community members. It feels like it's just should be addressed in some capacity. It was the general feeling from chatting with folks. There's a sense that the ARB process could be made easier. In some capacity, it was discussed in different ways. The other side of the argument, there's also, it feels like a need to celebrate the successes of ARB. It's said many times that the Architecture Review Board has been one critical component in shaping the identity, the brand, what we think of as Kiowa today, and that story may not being told well. Lots of different places around the country where you have similar places where there have been kind of design guidelines or other things that have been published in like a nice glossy coffee table book or something that really celebrates that, and really just trying to help understand the value add of some sides of the Architectural Review Board as opposed to just thinking about the kind of process side of dealing with them. There is a need to discuss annexation. It just felt like from chatting with stakeholders that it feels like the discussion is there, but really thinking about a broader discussion and really all the ways that it can bring in some of these other goals, potentially through the comp plan as a mechanism. Certainly the value add of annexing the land adjacent to Freshfields and an ability to help in sort of regulating what some of that is as it comes out, and also thinking about it as additional tax revenue in some capacity as well.
And I think that maybe perhaps the redevelopment should be under the land use and zoning regulations, things like consolidation of lots, things of that nature. I think that may be where some discussion should be had.
Yeah, some of these can fall in a few different buckets. So, transportation and mobility. As a third-party fly who's been sitting and listening in, it was said a number of times. I will agree as well to it that traffic congestion is the island's #1 problem. I'm not sure that there's a stakeholder who within their own purview isn't facing some downside to traffic. It came up almost, I think, first comment by almost every person that we chatted with, and it was interesting to hear related to their vested interest, different reasons that the congestion's holding them back. Interesting thing of note that road congestion is viewed by many as temporary, while there was not info presented to support this idea. I think this came from this sense that a lot of residents are saying it's related to new development, and it's not taking into account the continued growth of the island, the greater additional occupation, and it just sort of, I think whoever's making this comment was, I think, saying that it kind of feels like new development is a scapegoat which allows it to kind of point the finger to what the congestion is, which is, it's fine, but it maybe not helping to actually think about more long-term solutions and understanding that some of these might be a new normal. And if that's the case, what is the role in thinking about traffic congestion? What changes might need to be made? Very little discussion was had at anyone in terms of kind of fundamental changes to mobility as a means of addressing congestion. You know, I think in our industry, when we're thinking about addressing congestion, we kind of know that adding lanes doesn't work because of induced demand. Really, you have to think about fundamental changes to mobility as a whole system, different modes, different routes, different systems. And a lot of it, the discussion was just had around how do we address just this congestion on the parkway. And so the comp plan might have a role of just asking broader, bigger questions about mobility in general. Getting to and from Kiowa feels difficult, unpleasant, and unsafe. Just different folks saying that the route in is not, doesn't feel complementary to the experience inside. They feel different. Island life is car dependent. I think that this was a discussion where we were saying that folks can't, it's not a place where day-to-day needs can be met if someone doesn't own a car. For example, I'm a person who hasn't owned a car for 12 years now, and my planning is done around what is bikeable, what is walkable, and that type of thinking, it seems like, is not being applied yet here. There might be a need to look at the road system itself in a different way. It sort of is applied. The previous congestion was general, just mobility, which could be all the modes, looking at them in different ways, whereas this particular statement, someone was saying just, does the road itself need to be kind of thought of in a different capacity? There are really hard questions about the entry gate from a number of parties. Is it used? I know there's work being done in the background, but still this came up multiple times. Is it efficient? Is it working well? Can it be rethought? So lots of thinking on that, but it did come up multiple times. We heard from the folks at Edens that there's a sense that there's a drive-to culture at Freshfields that people can, we'll talk a little bit about biking a little bit further the next one down, but really right now it is primarily a car dominated drive-to place, with them being communicated to folks that the expectations that finding parking was hard and a lot of difficulties around driving and the shopping center. There was questions about kind of an organized mobility system or circulator, some type of organized mobility system replace the many existing individual systems. I don't think everyone was aware that so many different individuals are doing their own type of individual transportation systems presently, that they're moving their own staff, that they're supplementing incomes for people to get around. So there's all these different things going on. Would it be, is there any value in sort of making a more organized system to replace all those smaller component parts? This was stated in different ways that the island's bike culture is more recreational than functional. And again, I mean that in the sense of the way that I'm thinking about it from a technical sense of, is the bike culture something that allows the island to reduce individual vehicular trips, and the way that you would think about the trade-off of those things. And it seems like right now is more of, oh, this is a nice way that someone can get from another place. And if there was a desire to kind of reduce congestion through bike activity, that there would be some more fundamental changes made to the bike network system. The bike system has some safety concerns. A lot of those came up about emergency call systems, mile markers, things that would be helpful for emergency response. There are currently no public EV charging stations on the island. Is that something that should fall under someone's purview? Is someone wanting to take a stance on what the future is for EV as it relates to residents and a role that some organizing body should play in supplying those? Priority investment, I just included this section. It's something that comes up later out of the process, though, so just making a point that we are not skipping it, but is an output of later decision making. Resiliency is the most recently added component to the state comp plan requirements. Resiliency is an umbrella term that's larger than safety, larger than environment. It sort of asks all the different ways that a place is resilient. How can it respond to acute shocks, failures? Is everything redundant in a way where any system, if any one system were fail, the place would still be kind of alive and well? Resiliency is super important in terms of thinking about a municipality. I think I a lot of times give this example. New Orleans, for example, is a great example of a place that is not particularly resilient, and that's sort of well known. And as a result, it's a place that it's hard for them to do economic development there. They can't get companies to move there. Property values are low, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that they know that some of these things aren't resilient systems. It's not a strong system. So that's why a lot of this resiliency becomes really important, that you think about all the ways that you can make a place as strong as possible and able to sort of withstand any acute shocks. There is a good arsenal of equipment on the island for major storm events. So there's equipment stocked up if anything were, like a hurricane event were to happen. The utility feels like they've got the pieces that they need in order to respond. There is a sense that the island is just not well planned or designed in a way that responds to emergency situations. The sense that everyone had, that it's untested if everyone tried to flee at the same time, all using the parkway, if it not having redundancy there, if that causes an issue. There's a few different things that were talked about with emergency response that are made complicated because of just some of the way that the community is planned and laid out. There is a relationship between the island's design and emergency response. That's just what I was saying. We heard that from emergency responders a few times. There is a fear that the island's infrastructure has not been war tested yet. Just a sense of making sure if there's any responsibility to get these systems in check, make sure they're all good. It was unknown really how much thought has been given to the island's hurricane management plan and whether it's sort of ready to go, war tested, all the above. There's some clarification of roles that could decrease the difficulty of emergency response. We heard about a few different things where people said they didn't know whose role it was. Whose role is it to try to compel people to leave the island if they're still there? Is that the resort's role? Is it the town's role? There was also related, this was to the communication thing that came up earlier, of really kind of no system of clear communication or hierarchy, and especially brought up a number of times around emergencies. Emergency responders need training space on the island, just as sort of a blanket need for them in order to get some of their stuff done that they don't currently have. There's some gaps in responses to the emergency setup, especially around the fresh fields right now. It's an empty spot where emergency response time doesn't meet some of their standards that they would like to uphold. The lack of cell service is not just an inconvenience, but it's also a safety issue on the east end of the island, as all the emergency services run on cell data at this point. So emergency response is held back if they were trying to address something on the east end of the island. The threat of the loss of the causeway, or just even breakdown in short term of the causeway is really an extreme concern. It's probably one of a few systems. A utility has redundant systems for power and water, multiple that are run through here the road, but also underneath the water. There is no redundancy right now to the causeway. Kind of one of those few spots that feels like a real concern worth addressing. Currently, right now, Kiwa in general, and I just mean that in terms of all parties involved, are doing very little in terms of home construction with thoughts around resiliency. I think ARB has been thinking a lot about environmental concerns, but when you zoom up to the higher level term of resiliency, they express that they have not kind of done that level of thinking just yet, and there could be more thinking around that in terms of how folks might respond to conditions or bounce back from other extreme conditions. And then lastly, there were just a number of issues around personal safety and related planning that came up that felt like it was issues of resiliency there. So, all right, got through reading all of that. All right, we stopped a few times to address certain things along the way. Any new questions that have come up? Anything that they want response or clarification of? Okay, no. Great. So next steps, we do want to go forward as we've been talking about. The purpose of today is a little bit to level set. John and I have been discussing what we do think the next steps are. I think if this were a, excuse me saying this, I don't mean this as an insult. If this were a standard municipality in the sense where working with the municipality where they had total oversight, I think our next steps would be really clear. I think there are some deep questions to ask around maybe some coordinating with these other entities and try to understanding of priorities. Some big questions that we've been talking about. Certainly there's a next step with this group to align, to sort of confirm this stuff. And really, like I said, when I started out the beginning of this, the purposes of today was to sort of look at the challenges and to sort of ask if we're heading in the right direction and not to start thinking about solutions. I think as we start to move into that, there's certainly a role that you guys will play in confirming we're headed in the right direction, figuring out what priorities that we want to attack. Really with every comp plan, there's things get sort of bucketed out in the end where there's things that are hard and fast things that are part of this comp plan of yes, this is going to take this on. There's things that turn into recommendations for later of we should do a study about X thing about emergency preparedness. And so it's really a recommendation that just comes out of there, things that actually turns into real regulation. And so a lot of it will be figuring out what things are sort of present things we want to take on, things we want to write into code, things we want to write into recommendation. And really, as I said earlier, to Michael's mandate earlier, making this thing as actionable, as legible, as approachable as possible. And I think I'm going to mention this. I think this is one thing that we had started out when we initially responded to the RFP put out. I think one thing that we did talk about was that we felt there might be one way to, so this is sort of an old slide, but I think it's sort of relevant in terms of its big picture concept, that we felt like one way to frame really the entire plan might be through the lens of resiliency. And we went through each of these various facets of things and basically said, would it change the way that you thought about things if you really said you viewed it through the lens of resiliency and made sure you're talking about a place that was strong, that was healthy, that didn't that could face any threats, and that means economically healthy, that means architecturally strong, it means mobility network that's successful, that's sustainable, that's also charming, safe, all the above. So thinking about that as a potential lens through which to frame the discussion and really talking about this place that's dealing with the environment, as we said, in a way that feels kind of fragile at this moment, really thinking about a way that walking away from the plan where it feels really, really strong because it's sort of melded all these things together under the umbrella sense of making it resilient. So yeah, that was a way that we thought we could discuss all these things in a healthy way, and it would be interesting to see if it still makes sense now. Cool. Whew. Thank y'all for talking at me, for letting me talk at you for a little while. We will work with John in communication with you all to figure out what these next steps are. But any questions here before I walk away?
Oh, thank you, Blake. And
Okay.
I know you and John are going to keep us updated as to each step of the way. And where our interaction is needed from the Planning Commission, I hope you let us know as soon as we can get involved in any of those issues so we can get a head start on them. And Michael has a question, I believe.
I'm sorry, I was a little confused. The last page you showed, those are not our 10.
No, this is not the state mandate. This was previously just a way that we were saying we could approach the work. So yeah, different than the state mandate.
Donna, when we get to the public meeting, I'll
So
call
I want, because I want to keep it so that there's a clear record is going on. So at this time, can we allow folks who might have questions to ask questions? So if, okay.
Recommendation from my side, John. I mean, this is so important, right? And it's sad that there is no community here. But maybe we should, and I'm super happy to help here. It would have really been good to have certain representatives from the resort, from Kika, from maybe even the ARB, to really be asked to be here today to see the same thing. I mean, I know that we involve them in all of this, but going forward, we might want to think, about, more explicitly ask them to be here, because they're not only participating in this, they are a major shareholder in all of this. And I would love to have, for example, Shannon sit here, see this and give their comments. Right there, right at that moment where we all see this for the first time.
I want to go through my notes. I want to maybe allow.
I just have a question.
Okay.
Why don't you come up front, take the microphone and speak your name?
Your address, please. We'll go by protocol today.
Yes. I'm Donna Wyndham. I'm Executive Director of the Conservancy, and our address on the island is 80 Kestrel Court. I have a question about the process that we've undertaken so far. And the Conservancy, when you say we were one of the stakeholders that was interviewed, I want it to be very clear that the Conservancy, I received an email asking, and one of my staff members, we both replied back that we would attend, but we were told that only one of us really needed to attend. So that is one staff member's opinion speaking for the Conservancy. And what are you saying that's not true? I've got the emails. They were not from you. They were from the interviewer. So I was I didn't want to involve, fine, I don't want to waste my time if it's not going to be needed. It was just that we didn't need repetitive, things. I don't know if my person was asked to address all the questions in the process, or we were just looking at environmental. I don't know. Okay, but that's just, I wanted that to be stated very clearly, that it was not representative, I don't believe, of the Conservancy as a whole. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Donna, and I can assure you that we all understand the importance that Conservancy does for the island, and I appreciate you being here and appreciate you giving your comment.
So Donna, one thing I want to share, the reach out for stakeholder engagement is for essentially every organization to be represented. So it wasn't necessarily targeting one personnel but we apologize if for that particular reason, we will correct that to make sure that it's representative from your perspective as director of the full Conservancy. I have a list of comments here that I want to run through just to sort of set, based on what I've heard, that sort of would give me guidance and direction for our next steps for planning staff. And so I'm going to walk that right now, and then after that, we'll continue with our regular sort of beat of the meeting. The first thing I want to say is that this is the first time that we've done the comprehensive plan since 2015, a holistic view. We've updated the comprehensive plan in 2018, 2019, just some sections. And so I do want to share with the community that who have not partaken in this process, this gets as an ugly process. The reason why I say that is because we invite any and everyone to partake in this particular process, and there'll be comments and things that not representative of the whole swath of Kiowa. And that's the beauty of going through the comprehensive plan process, of us being able to hear every perspective of someone who may have a stake in what we call Kiowa. So whether that's a resident, a property owner, someone who has organization, or a town council member, a planning commission member, we want to hear everything under the sun of what they think about Kiowa during this process. And what that allows us to do is really begin to filter to say, since the last time we did this process, what truly has changed? And so I think the idea behind this Kiowa Next phase, it's broader than just updating, okay, our population element has changed. It's broader than just looking at, okay, we have added this amount of more residents to the island. It's being able to say, now that we've added this amount of more residents to the island, what does that change about our next steps? So I do want you guys to begin to think a little bit more broadly of how we capture all of that information. And then the next steps during this particular process, we begin to, as I said earlier, funnel down to what truly is the identity of Kiowa. And so some of those things that we said at the beginning are outliers that, hey, it's not relevant, it's not important to Kiowa, it's not part of our DNA. Those things begin to be ruled out. So I'm going to go through my list of things that I think are homework, responsibilities, and we'll set up some things of how this output between now and the next few weeks. Regarding all of the information that's been provided today, I do want to just state clearly again that this is just what we heard, unfiltered, raw in its nature, and saying that, hey, at least someone said this might be a concern that you guys should look at moving forward. And so as part of this process, the first things in presenting all of that qualitative data is to be able to marry that with some quantitative data to begin to synthesize that. So I heard the echoes about quantitative data that would at least present all of that information in a more systematic way that says, okay, maybe 50% of that folks are very interested in the natural environment comments or this, or to be able to more so, I guess, use the word rank, what would be top priorities based on those qualitative formats. And in addition to that, that would begin to let one of Larry's comments of affirming that those responses from a data standpoint, how that marries in. So if we get data from the Kiowa Island Real Estate Office, if we get data from the Community Association, what does now in that data sitting next to the qualitative responses, how do those things interlac? So we will publish a list of the persons who we met with, the stakeholders list. And as I stated at the beginning, that's not an exhaustive list, right? We will continue to do that throughout the process, but that list of stakeholders, we'll publish that. One of the things I will share is when we met with those stakeholder groups, attaching a specific quote to each of those at this stage of the process would kind of be inappropriate, right? Because at this stage, it's sort of at the beginning level of that filtering system. And we wanted to be as transparent and open. That means them providing their transparency as much as they can at the beginning of the stage. And if they're able to do that, then we begin able to see what are the real issues. And so we'll publish that, not to necessarily attach who said what of each of those qualitative comments, but we'll publish that list of stakeholders that that we met with. When it comes to the nomenclature, Dr. Heidensfelder, that's a simple fix of just connecting the dots here of, hey, this is not representative of the official town, this is not representative of Donna said this, of the Conservancy, but it's a representative of someone in the bucket of Kiowa has commented to that. So I do think that's important. That'll be addressed. I won't use that as a number one, but I wrote it as my number one. I think Marion, Joanne, you kind of led the conversation today with the community representation of what does that mean, and seeing this, does the community respond to this the same way? So the thought pattern in the beginning was that we would have these two buckets, one representative of the major stakeholders on the island, that we can have a direct conversation with them, and then the survey would capture mostly every particular resident, property owner on the island. I think it's still important for us to have the intermediate in between, which would be the meetings that you say, that the drop-in meetings. So I've listed that we should schedule a few drop-in meetings. I do think that we should have something for them to be able to respond to. So then once we update this particular information, then we can invite those to drop in and provide additional comments, concerns that fall into these list of buckets of elements. Those are the substantial ones. There might be some others that I've listed based on each of the elements. I just wanted to define that summary, and Mr. Chairman, if there's others, I mean, we can do that today. Let me know what those are from you all as a commission. But I think I've noted, I'll go back and make sure I've highlighted a list of those things. But the important piece, I think, for the takeaway, your feedback is valued in knowing what this represents today, will not necessarily be the official documentation, what's inserted as far as the plan per se. So it's a starting process. Like I said, this is a really dirty and gritty process of going through the comprehensive plan update, because it reveals stuff about the community that we probably didn't were aware of, or even if we were aware of it, we've been hesitant to really talk about it in a more direct manner. So I'll say my final thing is that I don't think that there was something in overall that we were surprised about. And I think that's probably consistent for most of the people who I've talked to, that none of the things that even this shared with our senior staff, that none of the things in their various departments or committees that they engage with, that nothing was substantially surprising. So I'll stop there. Any other final thoughts added for me? No? Okay. Well,
I want to remain up there for your staff comments, for any reminders or upcoming events or anything of that nature?
yeah, just kind of 3 things that I've listed. First, I want to formally introduce Daniel Vincent, who's our Planner 1. He's joined us today. So this is his first Planning Commission meeting. Yesterday was his first town council meeting attendance, so he's on staff. Daniel's responsibilities, he comes from West Palm Beach, but his responsibility is supporting the planning department right now and more of zoning administration. And then as we ramp up more, so you'll see him more involved in our long-range planning. But welcome to Daniel.
Welcome.
The second are 2 of our active sort of work groups that are meeting. The first are comprehensive marsh management plan work group. I think I shared at our last Planning Commission members that you're aware that we've set 3 priorities. And those 3 priorities are 1, to develop a comprehensive communication strategy around the marsh management plan, and how do we educate the community, how do we push the plan, encourage residents to actively do that on their individual properties, and sort of a robust communication plans around marsh education. And our very own Ms. Madeline Kay, I should have let her give her spiel now, but she's heading up that subgroup. So if you want to throw anything in now.
A brief report on progress. We are well on the way to the development of that plan. I'd say it's about 80% done, at least the sketch out, and Erin's going to be working with me to more fully develop it. We've met with several people from the various, all of the multitude of organizations that are part of this work group, and that's probably the most critical element of it, is that we really have reached out across all sorts of island entities, even into the county, to ensure that we've got a lot of talent, a lot of brain power coming together to work on this plan. The Conservancy has been extremely helpful. We will be going there primarily to highlight the first educational offerings that we've got, so that the intent is the education and the incentivization of some of these projects. I saw that the rain gardens were featured in this. We've got, Lee and I are working on publicizing that particular program. So we've made some really good progress. We've got some really good people on the team, and I'm really excited about Erin's involvement in this, because she's going to be doing quite a bit of the work. We meet on Friday. So good progress so far.
Awesome. Thank you for that, taking that role on as for that subgroup lead. The second priority for the marsh management work group is looking at pervious, impervious surfaces across the island and our current standards today. What standards can we change? What standards can we incentivize for property owners to begin to make substantial difference in how we look at stormwater and nature-based solutions on the island? And so that work group will actually meet tomorrow and be prepared for our official bigger work group later this month. Then the final one, you probably already heard a little bit talking about what happens at the Kiowa River Bridge, the public access there. We've kicked that essentially to the Environmental Committee to sort of bat it around a bit and provide their expertise and recommendations to work with a subgroup of the Marsh Management Group. But we expect that be a substantial sort of first leg project for a tangible project that we can see as part of the Marsh Management Plan. So I'm excited about whatever comes out of that recommendation to council. So those are the three things that's moving along. So it'll be a slow process, but I think we'll make some tremendous progress to keep that goal. The second one I want to give an update is that has taken a smaller pause is our landscape tree ordinance. I've let Ms. Hennessy, Mr. Iwan know, who's part of that group, also Dr. Kern, that we are currently trying to draft the language to prepare for that. That's currently in staff. This past 2 weeks have put a slow drip in the efficiency based on the work that's being done with the development agreement right now. And so I anticipate to get back on it this particular month to revamp that up. So you'll see us schedule something for this month to get that back on the road, for lack of better words. The final, well, not final, I'm sorry. I mentioned the development agreement. I'm not sure if any of you paid attention to town council meeting on yesterday regarding the amended and restated development agreement. One of the planning priorities that at the beginning of the year set was for us to review our zoning ordinance. And so a list of, and this is more so initially was related to ordinances that would be critical for the town to shore up at the sunsetting of the 2013 amended and restated development agreement. So that's the ending of the development agreement with the master developer, which is at the end of this year. And so there are a number of things that we need to ensure that we put in our zoning code or add as a new ordinance or revise language to make sure that there isn't any inconsistencies once that development agreement goes away. That's a big, robust project that staff, members of council, there's a work group formed, but that's sort of been one of those things that have kind of took a little bit of resources away. So I'm glad I have Daniel on now board to kind of help to move some of these along. So what I wanted to share in sharing that is that that particular project will eventually make its way back to the Planning Commission for a number of those ordinance amendments. And so I anticipate right now end of July into August of when we'll probably begin to see some of that come back for you for recommendation. So stand by there. Was mentioned of the rain gardens. Ms. Kay just mentioned that. I think maybe Michael will share some of that in his highlights from town council. But the rain garden project that working with the Conservancy, you know, Town Hall is one of the sites, approved sites for the rain garden install. So planning has been working with Lee and the Conservancy to really understand how that can really benefit, and I want that to be utilized as a platform for us as part of Marsh Management Plan, but really utilize that particular installation to also fall into what we can encourage residents to do on their own properties. I won't talk about the intersection of, I'll save that for Michael, Dr. Heidensfelder, and his updates from town council regarding the intersection. But that's all I have there. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We'll next move on to the council liaison. Michael, would you give us an update, please?
I don't have a lot of topics. Thank you, John, for picking a few already. The only thing really that might be interesting both for the community that is listening in as well as for you guys, is that we are working very intensively right now on several mitigation measures for the traffic situation at the first gate. Notably, Russ has pushed forward, and I helped him a little bit with this, to get to a point where we are seriously considering and want to implement that, for example, the right lane to exit the island will have no stop sign. The left lane will make a more distinct turn into Beachwalker in a way that you cannot go straight, but you have to turn, and then move the stop sign. And which I really hoped would already be, done by now, on Monday and Tuesday to approve a contract with a quasi-police force to help us guide traffic in the mornings and afternoons. I don't think that any of this needs to go in front of the Planning Commission, but just as an update that we are really working hard on this, and I would expect that during the months of May, these things are really rolling forward. As John said, we had quite a bit of discussion again, somehow about the ARDAR, the amended and development agreement, more related to one property in the preserve that Joe was then authorized to give more details about this to the community, and we hoped that this would be the end of the story, at least for the town, but I think this might continue. We will see how this goes. And otherwise, oh yeah, one more thing. We then also in executive session worked on a letter of intent about the potential purchase of the Kiawah Island real estate property, which would give us substantial flexibility for a longer-term solution for the first gate traffic problem. And then in conjunction with approving the letter of intent that we actually submitted this morning in person to the partners, the mayor and I, we also approved a project by Kimberly Horn to work on more details for this intersection. You might have seen in the documents for the Ways and Means on Monday that there are a various number, actually 3 at the moment, but it might actually grow to more than 3 options how that could look like, from just about the straight line on out towards Freshfield to entire, roundabouts. Actually, 2 roundabouts would even also be an option. So, but we discussed on Monday and then also yesterday a little bit what are the boundaries and how far Kimberly should really look into this. So I would expect that over the course of May, we will see a good amount of impact or proposal coming from them back to us how this traffic situation could be resolved. And I think that is pretty much it. Any questions?
Don't think so. Michael, thank you. And I know everyone is very pleased with all the progress the town and the council has made towards mitigating some of those front gate issues. So thank you. We'll now move on to public comments. Donna, I think you're representing the public. No comment? Okay, thank you. Commissioner comments. Start with Joanne. Madeline?
No more.
And Larry.
Just one, I participated in one of the open discussion sessions, and I was surprised by something. I was surprised by that there was a real need, or apparently we need some more formal organization to organization communication channels. I thought the informal ones would be sufficient, but it was very clear in that communication session that the individuals, the groups, wanted to have something more on an official formal basis, something structured and something regularly scheduled.
And you're talking now about town council with Kika board? Is that what?
Exactly.
I couldn't agree
Yeah, it was.
It was very apparent.
You know, it was, that's what surprised me. I thought there were these things going on, but apparently they're not official, so they don't count.
There are some of this, but not what probably a lot of people expect. Not yet, but we're working on it. So, yes, it has been clearly identified as such. Yes.
Any comments?
No, that was it.
Well, good. Well, thank everyone for attendance today. And with that, I'll ask for a motion for adjournment.
I move that we adjourn.
A second?
Second.
We are hereby adjourned.